I planned a goofy birthday ambush in my son's back seat, gift under my arm, heart full, certain surprise would fix the distance between us. Instead, I heard a voice slice the air beside him, calm, practiced, promising I wouldn't be a problem much longer. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. It started on March 12, 2024, a Florida evening slick with rain and Publix parking lot lights. Evan had texted he'd be home late from lifeguard training, so I drove to his high school instead, parked where the seniors linger, and slipped into the back seat of his Corolla with a bow-wrapped box. 18 candles deserved foolish joy. I wanted to be the ridiculous mom again. I tucked my knees, steadied my breath, and rehearsed a line that wouldn't make him roll his eyes. The passenger door opened, a gust of wet air, and then she climbed in beside him like she owned the seat I'd vacuumed that morning. I knew the perfume before I saw the jawline in the mirror. It was Lena, my former best friend, now my ex-husband's fiancée. She smiled at Evan like he'd been hers all along and said, "Your pathetic mother won't be a problem much longer." I didn't breathe for 3 seconds. Then I did what mothers learn in emergencies. I used my hands. My phone was already open from the Maps app. I slid my thumb to voice memos and tapped record. Florida is one-party consent for recordings, and I was one trembling party with a microphone and a reason. The rain thudded like a metronome. Evan pulled out, oblivious to the creature crouched behind him with a bow and an instinct. "Mark's attorney says we can get an injunction by Friday if we compile the messages," Lena said, buckling in. "We'll have her served at work. She'll be barred from contact, and Evan can move in with us until this blows over." I stared at the back of my son's ear. He kept nodding like a good kid being fed an agenda. "She hasn't threatened anyone," he said quietly. She keeps asking me to answer her calls." "That's harassment when it interferes with school," Lena replied. "We'll highlight the 10:58 p.m. text. Judges hate late-night texts. We'll add the car incident too, how she followed you after practice." I looked at the bow in my lap and felt it cut. Following him? I was bringing a gift. I was clawing at closeness with ribbon and tape, and they were packaging me as a threat. But then Evan turned onto Gulf to Bay and Lena dropped the next brick. Code enforcement is the second prong. I filed a complaint this morning for the shed and the fence height. She'll get a 10-day notice, $250 a day after that. By April, we'll be negotiating a sale to cover liens. My tongue went cold. My shed, not pretty but solid, held a hedge trimmer and boxes of his kindergarten art. I hadn't raised a fence for intimidation. I'd raised one for privacy after Mark moved in with Lena one street over. I pictured my little blue house swallowed by fee letters. "Mom's not selling the house," Evan said. His voice had a wobble I recognized from fevers. "Dad said we'd talk about college money." "College will be fine," Lena said, "too fast. We'll restructure things once she's stable. Judge first, code board next. Trust me, until that moment, I didn't understand how people build bureaucratic cages out of paper. Now I was inside one, crouched under their blueprint, pressing a thumb into my phone's red recording bar like it was a lifeline. They drove to the Starbucks by the causeway. I stayed hunched, counted to 60, and only then eased the door open a hair for air. The rain had thinned to mist. I slid out, eyes on the asphalt, and stayed low beside a truck until they went in. A gift bow stuck to my sweater. I pulled it free and set it on the passenger seat, where her scent still hovered. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2, and the recorder running. It captured my breath, the blinker, and the sentence that had unstitched me. I played it twice in my driveway because disbelief is a stubborn animal. Then I started moving in straight lines. At the kitchen table, I wrote a list on an old homework sheet: audio file, timestamps, code, injunction, shed, fence, late-night text. I added a word I hadn't wanted all day: custody. It looked like a dare. I opened my laptop and filed a public records request with Pinellas County Code Enforcement for any complaints about my address made in the last 48 hours. It took 6 minutes. I scheduled a fence and shed inspection myself and printed the receipt. But then, the code email landed first, faster than I expected. Complaint 24 to 3110, received March 12, 9:08 a.m. Anonymous tip alleging unpermitted accessory structure and fence above 6 feet. Deadline to comply, March 22. Potential fine, $250 per day, escalating to $500 per day upon board finding. Inspector assigned, P. Rizzo. I read it twice and made coffee at 11:40 p.m. because sleep felt like disloyalty to my own case. At 7:30 the next morning, there was a white envelope stuck to my front door with blue painter's tape. Notice of violation. 10 days to remove or permit the shed and reduce the fence 2 inches. The letterhead smelled faintly of toner. I took pictures, photographed the tape, measured the fence. It stood at 6 feet even, using a Home Depot level that still had a clearance sticker. The inspector's note claimed 6'2". I wrote 6 notes in the margin I'd photocopied, except at 10:02 a.m. my work email pinged. HR wanted to clarify schedule adherence, citing concerns escalated by a domestic situation. My attendance record for February showed 1 late sign-in when Evan's tire blew on 19th Street. I answered with my last 3 pay stubs, my doctor's appointment email, and a sentence I kept clinical. If there are external allegations directed at me, please instruct the complainant to contact me in writing. By lunch, my ex-husband Mark texted, "We need to move Evan to my place until things calm down. Don't make this ugly." He divorced me 3 summers and a flood insurance hike ago. He still used threats like punctuation. I didn't answer. I forwarded the text to myself and uploaded it to a folder labeled Hearing. I called one attorney. Her retainer was $8,200 payable up front. My savings were half that and earmarked for Evan's dorm deposit. I thanked her and said I'd go pro se for now. Then I called a legal aid clinic, got an appointment for Friday morning, and printed their intake form. I packed a binder with tabs, audio, code, texts, employment, property. One problem I wrote on a sticky note like a caption, "Lena." I walked the backyard, found the shed latch, and opened it to my life. I ran my hand over the plastic bin labeled Evan, K, the green paint handprints, the crooked dragon mask from a rainy field day. If they wanted to make this shed a weapon, I'd make it a stage. I took photos of every harmless shelf. I printed the receipt from when I'd bought the shed used at a church sale 3 years ago. No foundation, no power, no plumbing, no permit required per the county's own guidance. I highlighted the line. But then, in the county's online records, an alert I didn't know existed popped up. Fraud guard. New instruments on parcel. There was a quitclaim deed recorded March 11th, attempting to transfer a 25% interest in my property to M.R. Halpern. Mark. The signature block had my name, misspelled by 1 letter, and a notary stamp from a UPS store on Belcher. My hands went cold again. People think theft comes with a ski mask. Sometimes it's fonts and a seal. I drove to the UPS store at 3:05 p.m. The clerk wasn't thrilled, but I asked for the notary's log under a records request. She said I needed a subpoena. I asked for the owner. He looked at the photocopy I slid over, tapped the notary stamp with a Bic, and said that stamp was discontinued last year. He wrote his district manager's number on a sticky note. I took a photo of him holding his own note because documentation is a muscle once you start using it. At home, I drafted an affidavit of fraud using a template from the clerk's website, filled it out with everything I knew, and drove it downtown. The woman behind the glass took my affidavit and told me I'd get a call if the recorder's office needed more. I left with a receipt and a copy stamped in blue. Blue ink calmed me in a way green tea never had. Until Friday, I told myself in the parking garage, don't fall apart. Friday morning at legal aid, the waiting room smelled like the citrus cleaner you only notice when you're scared. The attorney assigned to me, Patel, had calm eyes and a pen that clicked twice before each sentence. I played him the audio. He didn't blink at pathetic mother. He did blink at injunction and code enforcement and wrote an outline that felt like oxygen. 2 fronts, he said. We respond to any injunction petition with your evidence and request fees. We prepare for the code hearing with photographs, measurements, and the inspector's variance history. And we open a case with the sheriff for the fraudulent deed. You're doing the right things. What about Lena? I asked. She used to be my friend. Now she's coaching my son to call me unstable. She works at a boutique brokerage. She volunteers at his school. We don't litigate feelings, he said gently. We litigate facts. If she's a real estate licensee and filed a false code complaint to manipulate a sale, that's a complaint with the state. We'll draft it. But then, that afternoon, a process server came to my door with a thick envelope. Petition for injunction for protection against stalking, filed by Lena on behalf of minor. Evan's birthday had turned my son into a legal pretext. The petition listed 6 incidents, late-night texts, following, threatening tone in emails regarding fence, erratic behavior at practices, and attempted concealment in vehicle. They had my ambush, somehow. Evan must have texted someone about me hiding. My cheeks burned when I saw concealment, a word that made love sound like contraband. The hearing was set for March 20. I wrote the date on my kitchen calendar, a cheap grid that suddenly ran my life. I stapled the petition to the tab in my binder and wrote, in big letters, response. For 4 nights, I worked like I was getting a second degree. I pulled phone records that showed 3 calls after 9 p.m. in 6 months, all answered within 10 minutes. I printed screenshots of my texts, everyone polite, everyone about rides, homework, or the time the power went out. I wrote a 1-page timeline of March 12th, from Publix to the Starbucks to the bow on the seat. I attached the audio transcript, typed carefully, noting timestamps. I highlighted the sentence that sharpened their intentions. I also filed the complaint with the Florida Real Estate Commission, attaching the audio and the code complaint record, arguing that a licensee had abused public process for personal leverage. I included the fake deed as pattern. I dropped the envelope at the post office like it contained a heart that needed transplant speed. Except, on March 18th, Evan came by after school. He stood in the doorway like the boy who'd once refused to come in after scraping his knee. Lena said you're going to ruin Dad's life, he said. She said you're dragging everyone through court. I'm defending our house and myself, I said, keeping my voice low. I have a recording, Ev. I heard her plan. Listen and make your own decision. He listened, standing stiff by the entry table. At Lena's line about fines and judges, he flinched. At your mother won't be a problem much longer. He took the earbuds out like he'd been burned. She didn't mean it like that, he said automatically, but it sounded like someone else had put the words in his mouth. He didn't hug me when he left. He didn't slam the door either. He was a good kid drafted into a war he didn't understand. The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy dress that didn't wrinkle in humidity and shoes I could stand in for hours. The courtroom was small, fluorescent, and cold. The judge called our case. Lena sat at one table with a lawyer in a blue suit. Mark sat behind them with a jaw that still clenched, like a dare. Evan was not present. My hands didn't shake when I swore to tell the truth. Fear eventually sits down. The attorney started with the script. Pattern of stalking, repeated contact, fear for safety. He tried to make late night sound like predatory. He held up the petition like a shield. When it was my turn, I didn't give a speech. I did what the instructions on the wall asked. Speak clearly, answer directly, show exhibits. I have Exhibit A, an audio recording made on March 12th, I said. It captures the petitioner coaching my son on how to obtain this injunction and how to trigger code enforcement fines to pressure me to sell my home. I also have Exhibit B, the code complaint filed that morning, and Exhibit C, photographs and measurements of my fence, which is compliant. Exhibit D is an affidavit filed with the clerk regarding a fraudulent deed recorded March 11th. The judge leaned forward. We played the recording aloud. The sentence landed in the room with a thud that wasn't just from the cheap speakers. The judge looked at Lena, then at me. Where were you when this was recorded? She asked. In the back seat of my son's vehicle, I said, with a gift for his birthday. I had not been invited. I understand that's odd. I am not proud of the impulse. But Florida law allows me to record a conversation I am present for, and I believed my relationship with my son was being interfered with. What I heard was a coordinated effort to use this court and code enforcement to pressure and isolate me. Lena's attorney objected to characterization. The judge overruled. She asked for dates. I gave dates. She asked for numbers. I gave the 10-day notice, the $250 per day, the case number on the fraud guard alert. Every number carried a job to do. The judge's pen moved. When it was Lena's turn, she leaned toward the microphone like it had ever loved her voice. I was trying to protect Evan from a volatile parent, she said. She hid in his car. Who does that? Someone who still buys birthday bows, I said, because sometimes the truth, small and round, sits better than a defense. The judge sighed, the kind that acknowledges the human mess baked into statutes. Petition denied, she said. I find insufficient evidence of stalking or repeated harassment under the standard. I also find evidence that the petitioner engaged in conduct designed to manipulate public processes to gain leverage in a domestic matter. Respondent's request for fees is granted in the amount of $3,450. Petitioner is cautioned that further misuse of these processes may result in sanctions. Mr. Halpern, you are not a party, but you are present, and you should take care. The word granted slid into my bones like heat. I didn't smile. I wrote the number down, then the date, March 20, in the hallway after Lena brushed past me with a shoulder graze that was almost theatrical. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. I didn't answer. Security stood 10 feet away. The exit sign glowed green. But then, 2 days later, Inspector Rizzo arrived with a clipboard and a tape measure. He was polite. He took his own measurements. He measured wrong the first time, using the slope instead of the post. I asked, pleasantly, to remeasure from the base at grade, per the manual I'd printed from the county website. He blinked, remeasured, and recorded 6 feet even. He photographed the shed. I handed him the guidance page that exempted non-permanent accessory structures without electrical from permitting. He nodded. "We'll see at the board hearing," he said, non-committal as a weather report. The Code Enforcement Board met April 9th in a room that looked like a library that hated joy. I brought my binder and my neighbor Jamie, who had a knack for sounding official when she was simply honest. Lena didn't show. Mark didn't show. The anonymous complainant line on the case file felt like an inside joke everyone understood. I presented the photos. I presented the measurement. I presented the guidance. I played the recording again, the part about second prong. The board members exchanged looks that were less legal and more human. "Case dismissed," the chair said, "with prejudice to refiling on the same facts for 1 year." He looked at Rizzo. "And let's make sure we're measuring properly on slopes, folks." He winked at nobody in particular. "Next case." Jamie squeezed my elbow so hard I knew I'd bruise. I didn't care. I added the written finding to my tab like a person putting back a stolen thing. Except, on April 15th, the clerk's office called about my fraud affidavit. A fraud specialist named Alvarez had reviewed the deed and found the notary stamp invalid, the book and page misreferenced, and the signature inconsistent with 3 originals on file. An investigator from the sheriff's economic crimes unit would be in touch. "In the meantime," she said, "we've indexed a notice of fraud in the chain of title. Any title search will see it. You've protected yourself." I hung up and cried at my sink the way you cry when the adrenaline finally lets you. It was ugly, cathartic, and small. I wiped my face, made a sandwich, and sent a copy of the notice of fraud to my mortgage servicer because bureaucracy will always love a paper trail. The Florida Real Estate Commission responded next. They'd opened an investigation into allegations of misuse of public process for private gain by a licensee. They wanted documents, names, dates. I sent them the binder plus a cover letter so clean even my English teacher would have smiled. I didn't ask for punishment. I asked for accountability. Those are not the same. 1 week later, Evan texted a photo of a pancake shaped like a heart he'd made at his dad's. "Weird morning," he wrote. "Can I come by after school?" I typed yes so fast I misspelled it and had to correct. He came by with a backpack and stayed on the porch until I invited him in like he was practicing adulthood. He sat at the table and looked everywhere but at me. "I told Lena I heard the audio," he said. "She said you edited it. I asked her for the original date stamp and she blocked me." He looked at his hands. "Dad said it's complicated." I said it's not. I poured him sweet tea and didn't tell him I'd been waiting to hear that since the day he learned to read. He looked older in that chair. He looked like the boy who'd once cried because he'd broken a stick he liked. Growth hurts. The sheriff's investigator called the next day. He'd visited the UPS store, confirmed the notary had lost a stamp last year, and traced the preparer email to a laptop at Lena's brokerage. The case might never become a courtroom movie. But he sounded like a man who'd seen sincerity and lies and could distinguish them 10 minutes faster than most. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges. I said yes, if the evidence supports it. Meanwhile, HR emailed to close the concern after verifying no policy violations. I printed that email and slid it into the employment tab like a souvenir from a museum nobody visits twice. But then, a midweek envelope arrived from a law firm I didn't know. It contained a demand letter from Mark's attorney alleging tortious interference with Evan's education environment and demanding $12,000 for legal fees and inconvenience. It was dressed up like law, but it smelled like intimidation cologne. I sent it to Patel at Legal Aid. He wrote a reply that made me want to bake him bread. Any attempt to withhold Evan from his mother absent a lawful order will be met with appropriate relief. We will seek sanctions for continued bad faith litigation posture. Sometimes words are fences, too. On May 3rd, the Real Estate Commission sent their finding, probable cause to proceed. Lena's license was temporarily suspended pending a formal hearing due to conduct demonstrating dishonesty or untrustworthiness, including abuse of process. It wasn't prison. It was something she valued that now had a dent she couldn't sand out. Consequences don't have to be cinematic to be real. 2 days later, the court clerk docketed the order awarding me $3,450 in fees on the denied injunction. Lena paid through her attorney with a cashier's check that arrived in an envelope so stiff you could hurt yourself on it. I deposited it and used $1,200 to fix the air conditioner that had been rattling since January. That hum had been the soundtrack to every night I stayed up making tabs. Silence is also a victory. On May 10th, the Code Enforcement Board posted their written decision online, the words "case dismissed with prejudice" sitting there like a small, neat stone. I printed 2 copies because I've learned redundancy is a kindness to your future self. Evan came over for dinner and stayed to watch a storm sweep over Clearwater Beach on TV instead of from the pier. He looked at the blue house he'd grown up in, the fence at 6 feet, the shed with his dragon mask resting on top. "I almost let them take this from you," he said, voice low. "You almost let them take it from us," I said, and didn't ruin the moment by explaining that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding to stop printing the same page. On May 20, the sheriff's investigator called with a final note. "We're recommending charges for uttering a forged instrument," he said. "The state attorney will decide. I can't promise anything. But your affidavit and the fraud notice saved your title." "Thank you," I said, because gratitude is a document too. The following week, Mark texted another kind of message. "I'm sorry it went like this," he wrote. Lena wasn't honest with me either. It was the most expensive sentence he'd ever written. I didn't answer. He wasn't my case anymore. On June 1, Evan turned in his dorm deposit to Florida Gulf Coast University. We drove down to tour the campus, a loop of lakes and sidewalks where kids walked with their hands, full of possibility and iced coffee. On the way back, he asked if he could stay at my place until August. It wasn't a legal order, it was better. He helped me rebuild one crooked shelf in the shed. We laughed when the drill bit slipped and carved a crescent in the wood that looked like the moon trying not to smile. He asked about the gift I'd meant to give him on March 12th. I pulled it from the pantry. He opened the small box and held the key I'd had cut at the hardware store. It was a copy to the front door, engraved with a tiny anchor, because home has always been a thing we moor to when storms lie. "This is cheesy," he said, but he put it on his ring anyway. I don't tell this because I love courtrooms or because I believe every bad actor learns a big lesson. Some people only learn that paper cuts when you wield it wrong. I tell it because a mother crouched in a back seat can be a punchline or a witness, depending on whether she presses record. The gift I brought that night ended up being evidence. The bow fell off, but the ribbon held. I still keep the binder in the hall closet, tabs bright as candy. On the spine, I slipped a label I printed at work: House, Proof. It reminds me of 2 things. First, I am not a problem. Second, a plan whispered in a car can be unbuilt with a level, a transcript, and a willingness to sit under cold lights while someone says "granted" into a microphone. On Evan's 19th birthday, we ate supermarket cake at the kitchen table. The fence kept the wind off the candles. He lit them himself and looked at me like he didn't need saving and knew I'd tried anyway. When he blew them out, the smoke curled up and vanished, soft as a promise we both could keep.